Hopefully, luck is on your side this Friday the 13th, and that follows a full moon that happened on Wednesday. Maybe things will be a little bit weird out there tonight. The official start of summer, 1 week away, Friday, June 20th at 9:42 p.m. Central. The teleconnections and hemispheric patterns are firmly neutral, so most of our weather dominated by processes at the synoptic, mesoscale, and convective scales. One of those types of processes, of course, are hurricanes, and we don't have anything out in the Atlantic. The Eastern Pacific, a different story. We've got Tropical Storm Delilah out there. Sustained winds 40 miles an hour, central pressure barely a blip at 1001 millibars. It's a little bit hard to find, but that's it right there. Looks like it's off of Acapulco somewhere. It is expected to remain a tropical storm, will not be bothering anybody. It'll just progress northwest out into the Pacific Basin. No real impact for the U.S. And on that surface chart, we've got a delightful assortment of things to look at. Let's go over them one by one. First, we have this Canadian outbreak into the Great Lakes, the northeastern U.S., dropping the temperatures into the 60s and 70s. On the other side, the Bermuda High starting to make its appearance and bringing us that southerly and southeasterly flow we typically see this time of year. Closer to the central U.S., the dry line making an appearance, dividing 60s dew points from 40s and 30s further to the west. A few 50s in there, and just enough moisture west of the dry line to support showers and storms on the Front Range down to the Sacramento Mountains of New Mexico. Further south, almost off the edge of the map there, some higher dew points. The very start of the Mexican monsoon. We're going to go over that shortly. In the southwestern deserts, dry. Dew points in the 20s on the Four Corners region, even a few teens. And up in the northwestern U.S., a new Pacific surge coming through Washington, Oregon, dropping those temperatures down into the 50s, 57 at Seattle. Checking to see if that's on the screen there. Yeah, 57, 58 at Portland. Wow. Would be amazing to experience that down here in Texas. We are already baking in those 90-degree temperatures. In the northeastern U.S., we saw a range of temperatures from the 60s in New England to the 80s and a few 90s in Virginia and Maryland. Yesterday, Baltimore Inner Harbor reached 96 degrees, tying its daily record. We have some prominent mountain wave activity from Saratoga Springs across Vermont and New Hampshire. You can see those cloud formations right there, transverse bands. Further south, let me give you the severe outlook. A marginal risk of severe storms for a broad area across Washington, D.C. and northern Virginia. We have flood watches across that same area today and tonight, including all of Washington, D.C., Fredericksburg, Richmond, Charlottesville, and Newport News. Excessive rainfall with excessive runoff. That's been an ongoing problem. Creeks and rivers are swollen. And remember not to cross any floodwaters that are unusual or you're not familiar with. We also have a marginal risk into Kentucky and Tennessee, except the far west. Further north in the Great Lakes, downright cold in northern Michigan. Highs were in the low 50s from northern Wisconsin into Minnesota. But in the Midwest, a range of 70s and 80s. In the southeastern U.S., heavily convective, numerous showers and storms along the central Atlantic coastal plain, all the way down into southern Georgia, and picking up more convective activity as that next wave lifts out of Texas. Temperatures were in the 80s with 90s in Florida and southern Alabama. Orlando yesterday saw a morning low of 76 at Sanford, tying a record set in 2021. In the southern plains, this disturbance and the associated areas of convection heading off to the east and putting us back into a more typical June pattern. We had 80s for afternoon highs in the lower plains, 90s from the Panhandles to South Texas, and 100s from the lower Rio Grande Valley into the Pecos River region. We had a lot of rain yesterday across the south. Daily rainfall records were set at a few stations, including McAllen, Victoria, and Hot Springs, Arkansas. But for today, the Panhandle is under a slight risk of severe storms into tonight, primarily for high wind and hail. Most of the rest of West Texas and Oklahoma under a marginal risk. In the northern plains, quite a variety of temperatures from the 50s in Minnesota to the 60s and 70s in the Dakotas, and 90s from western Kansas into southeastern Colorado. We have this slight risk area out ahead of the Front Range. Some of these storms will be coming out into the lower elevations, interacting with some of that moisture near the dry line, and we could see a few hailstorms and possibly downburst winds. Further north up there in Montana, an enhanced risk that runs from about Great Falls to Helena and down to Billings. Within that enhanced risk area, we could see scattered reports of large hail. In the Rockies, hot conditions, 95 at Pueblo, 89 at Denver with those storms coming off the Front Range. The Mountain Valleys looking at 70s and 80s and 90s for the Four Corners. Then the Southwest deserts. Yeah, they're getting into a heat wave. Phoenix expecting 108 this afternoon, 104 at Tucson. No, that's not Tucson, this is. And 103 at Las Vegas. We're looking at 100s in the Mojave Desert as well. There is a, let me show that to you. Yeah, it's always better to see these things. Heat advisory in the El Paso, Las Cruces, Deming area Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Temperatures into the mid-100s each day. Extreme heat warning from the lower deserts of Arizona, southern Nevada, and the Mojave Desert. Temperatures will be 105 to 115 this weekend. That includes Phoenix, Tucson, Yuma, Las Vegas, Barstow, the lower Grand Canyon as well, right in there. What about the monsoon? Well, we'll show you the monsoon graphics at the end of the forecast segment. Nothing for the next week. Red flag warnings, lake wind advisories in northwestern Nevada, including the Reno area, due to strong southwest winds gusting to 35 miles an hour. In the San Joaquin Valley, looking at 80s north and mid-90s south. Los Angeles remaining pleasant with that marine layer. 74 at LA, downtown, 71 for San Diego. Yesterday, Los Angeles tied its daily record maximum rainfall with a trace of rain in the rain gauge. That goes to show you how LA is entering the dry season. In downtown LA at Dodger Stadium, typically monthly totals are 0.09 in June, 0.02 in July, and 0 in August. The rainiest month, take a guess, February with 3.64. For the northwestern U.S., yesterday Salt Lake City tied a daily record for the warmest morning for June 12th with 63 degrees. However, changes are on the way with a frontal system from northern California through Idaho and Montana, and that Pacific air driving into the coastal regions right up to the Cascades, bringing that stratus right up to the barrier range right there. So you see a very clear distinction between stratus and fog and relatively clear air off to the east. And there's the surface chart with a enhanced pressure gradient across Washington and Oregon, signaling the arrival of Pacific air. 1028 millibar high offshore, heading north into Alaska, a little pesky occlusion off of, I guess that'd be west of Juneau. In Alaska itself, one of the first heat advisories of the season, that's going to be for Fairbanks for Sunday. Much of the Fairbanks area and the Tanana River Plains near Fairbanks will be in the 80s this weekend, and they're expecting 86 by Sunday. Flood watch is in effect for all of the North Slope area except around Barrow. Rapid snowmelt, which will cause problems on rivers and creeks. We've had record snowpack across the North Slope late this spring, and it's time for all that to melt, which means ice jams, flooded rivers, and sudden flash flooding. So if you're camping, hunting, or traveling on the Dalton Highway up there, pay close attention to your surroundings. Hot conditions starting to show up in the Northwest Territories. 77 at Inuvik with Chinook winds out of the southwest. Another outbreak of cold air through Nunavut, temperatures dropping back near freezing. In Alberta, that's our active area in Canada. Severe thunderstorm watches from Edmonton down through Calgary and into southeastern Alberta. Further north, statements issued for possible landspouts and funnel clouds from Edson and Whitecourt all the way to Edmonton. Air quality advisories have been scaled back across much of central Canada, but they do continue in the form of warnings in northwestern Alberta and advisories all the way back through the Alaska Highway into Yukon. In the eastern part of Canada, frost advisories for central and eastern Ontario from Armstrong to Kirkland Lake and into Quebec around Val-d'Or. Temperatures will fall to around freezing. Additional frost advisories posted in Quebec around Latuque to Roberval, in northwestern New Brunswick, and in central and western Newfoundland, including Stephenville. I have received a few viewer questions about that little quiz we ran last week. That was which was the coldest place in the tropics that during the coldest month had a low of 50 and a high of about 60. And that was within the tropical regions. And it was, most importantly, at sea level and on the coast. So what kind of place could have that crazy weather? Well, I did go into the comments and answer people's questions about that, but I've been forgetting to put that on the show. That's actually going to be in Namibia. It's going to be that station right there, Walvis Bay. And that is a tropical station. And you can see those very cool temperatures in the interior. Of course, it's nighttime there, and those are higher elevations. But on the coast, 70 degrees, so probably a little bit warm. They are in their equivalent of December in the Northern Hemisphere. But typically, 50 at night and 60 during the day. So let's return it closer to home and take a look at the weather influences over this weekend and the upcoming week. There's our disturbance in the Ozarks, some troughing extending into Arkansas, the main area of westerlies across the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Plains, and the Great Lakes, and down south coming increasingly under the influence of upper ridging. In fact, you can see an anticyclone right there around Douglas, Arizona. There's the easterly flow just to the south and westerly flow to the north. Another lobe of the subtropical high across Florida, and of course they are getting those warm temperatures well into the 90s. Over this week, this disturbance in the Ozarks will continue lifting to the northeast. It's no longer a closed low, it's a trough, so it's going to be embedded in this larger area of prevailing westerlies. This subtropical high builds into the El Paso area for Sunday and covers part of the panhandles in New Mexico. So that is going to shut down any possibility of the monsoon. That is a big subtropical ridge. On the west coast, however, under strong westerly flow from the Pacific, so it will be a little bit closer to seasonal normals and maybe even a little bit cool for this time of year. Some troughs blazing across the southwestern U.S., but they will remain quite hot. As we go into late next week, some changes on the way. This subtropical high displaces to the west. This subtropical high continues off of Florida, backs off maybe just a tiny bit, but you can see that broad southerly flow into the Gulf, bringing that tropical moisture northward. As we go into Thursday and Friday, this little subtropical high starts moving east again. And now we're starting to get a little bit of that southerly flow trying to sneak into Arizona. We're going to look at the details a little bit later, but this is more characteristic of a monsoon-type pattern. The subtropical high displaced across the central U.S., which means very warm weather for that region in about a week. And Texas opening up with that southeasterly flow, south flow for Arizona, but another big Pacific trough on the way, so not quite like typical August weather. This is more March or April as you go further out west. That's a huge trough. So definitely some very disturbed weather out there towards next weekend. And further, this is getting to be a very high meridional pattern. Look at those big waves, just boom, boom, up and down. So we're going to be getting into some anomalous weather, at least maybe some areas with very cool temperatures, very hot temperatures, especially out there in the Midwest. And this opened up southerly flow across much of the central U.S. Precipitable water, there is quite a bit of that, 1.5 all the way to Pennsylvania, Iowa, Oklahoma, Texas, basically everywhere in the southeastern and eastern U.S., and even 2 inches up the Atlantic coast. And just a very, very quick look through the weekend. We're focusing on the Carolinas right there, another band of almost 2 inches in the Ohio River Valley. So this is going to be a very wet pattern for at least a few days. And it just kind of continues there through midweek. And as far as the severe weather setup, plenty of moisture on the Great Plains, but we are under the influence of that subtropical ridge coming out of the New Mexico, West Texas area, so better probabilities further up north. And you'll notice that there is a lack of a subtropical jet. There's a little bit of a 35-knot flow right there for early Sunday, but it mixes out and the low-level flow is kind of weak. So that typically spells multi-cells, windstorms, hailstorms, that kind of thing. As we go into Tuesday and Wednesday, increasingly baroclinic. You can see a 55-knot jet right there in the Central Plains, plenty of moisture, so increasing chances for severe weather in the Central Plains, Kansas, Missouri. And we go into Friday and Saturday, low-level jet, but quite dry. You can see the moisture is not present. In fact, it's kind of carried further up north towards Minnesota and North Dakota, and this is getting too far out, but I'll just, let you take a look at that and make up your own mind what you think is going to happen. So let us take a quick perusal of that forecast overnight into tomorrow. This is where we're at for tomorrow evening. Big cool down for the northeastern U.S. as the remainder of that cold air floods south. High Saturday ranging from the 60s in New England to the 80s in Virginia. Looking for extensive showers and storms from Pennsylvania down through the Appalachians with those 1.5 to 2 inch precipitable water amounts. Very wet as well across the southeastern U.S. The Great Lakes will start to see that cold air eroding across upper Michigan, highs rising into the mid-50s and low 60s. The north central U.S., warm temperatures expanding north towards South Dakota up to the 80s and a few 90s there. We have a slight risk of severe thunderstorms in the northwestern high plains from northwestern Nebraska to southern Montana, including Rapid City. Could see large hail, high winds, and maybe an isolated tornado. Doesn't look like an outbreak or anything like that. Texas continues to warm up, temperatures into the 90s across much of the state, 100s south and west. And we've got a big heat wave starting up in the southwestern U.S. 110 for Phoenix, Tucson and Las Vegas up to 106. Then we go into Sunday. The northeastern U.S. warms up as that air mass modifies, highs in the 60s and 70s. Extensive rain and showers through the Appalachians, especially in West Virginia, in proximity to this stationary front. We do have a marginal risk in North Carolina and southern Virginia near that front, looking mostly for hail and wind, and a slight risk in that very same area of the high plains, north central Nebraska, western South Dakota, southeastern Montana, continued threat of hail and high wind. Further south, a continued marginal risk on the Central Plains down to Oklahoma, the Panhandles, northwest Texas, possibly as far south as DFW. And in the southwestern U.S., the peak of the heat wave. We're going to be seeing 113 at Phoenix, 108 for Las Vegas, and 83 for Los Angeles downtown. Then I'll just take you quickly through the rest of the period. Monday, rainy across the Appalachians and much of the southeast. Very likely we're going to start seeing marginal and slight risks across South Dakota, southern Minnesota. Extensive MCS activity on a daily basis near this frontal system, and the southwestern U.S. coming off the tail of that heat wave, still up to the 110s in Phoenix. And just going very quickly through the rest of the sequence, starting to see a little bit more rain down to the south. That's that southerly flow starting to open up. You can see the storms appearing next weekend in New Mexico, and this front just off to the west. So it is going to be getting busier west of the Rockies and on the Rockies themselves going into next week. And here it is, our southwest monsoon graphics. The colors and the values you see right here, those are the surface dew points. We have Albuquerque, El Paso, Chihuahua, Hermosillo, Tucson, and Phoenix. So you can follow those numbers to see what the moisture field is doing. And superimposed, we have the wind vectors at 700 millibars and the heights at 700. That's up at about 10,000 feet. That is just above the mountains, and that kind of represents a steering flow for the moisture across that mountainous terrain. So going forward through the weekend, it is going to be dry. You can see 20s and 30s dew points across Arizona and New Mexico. As we go further into the future, a little bit of westerly flow, possibly bringing some moisture off of the Gulf of California by Tuesday, very short-lived, and then it gets very dry around midweek. Now the real changes come up later next week. Look at that right there. Now we've got some deep southeasterly flow opening up, bringing that moisture into West Texas. 62 at Hermosillo, 47 gradually coming up there at El Paso and Chihuahua. And then you can see as we get into Friday and Saturday up to the 50s at El Paso and Chihuahua. So this is more typical of late June. But further to the west, this strong westerly flow definitely taking a toll across Arizona. So a little bit harder to get that moisture in place out there. Most of the precip will be around the Continental Divide and the Southern Rockies. So there you go. That's going to be around Sunday, June 22nd. That's the latest map that I have right there. Starting to get some 40s into Arizona, 50s in New Mexico. And that could be temporary because there's going to be further changes as this trough continues to the east. East of the Rockies, this does look a little bit more like July and August. So we could see a continued infusion of moisture into the Mexican Plateau, New Mexico, and West Texas. And I'm getting a bit talked out here, so let me go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks to our newest supporters, Mel 24/7, Cyrus Rushdie, Max D, and Ed Davies. Thank you very much for that generous support. All right, we'll be back on Monday for the private supporter edition, and on Wednesday for everybody else. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.